Zipper rolls out to the right, pitches off to Taylor, and Taylor's to the 20, down to the 15, down to 10, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Touchdown, Billy Taylor! Touchdown, Billy Taylor! Billy Taylor scored a touchdown from 21 yards out. The crowd goes berserk. It was November 22nd, 1969. That they came to Berry, Michigan, all dressed in maize and blue. The words were said, the prayers were read, and everybody cried. But when they closed the coffin, there was someone else inside. Oh, they came to Berry, Michigan, but Michigan wasn't dead. And when the game was over, it was someone else instead. 11 Michigan Wolverines put on the gloves of gray, and as the organ played the victors, they laid Woody Hayes away. Under center is Wangler at the 45. He goes back. He's looking for a receiver. He throws downfield to Carter. Who's got it better than us? Nobody!
Welcome to the Michigan Man Podcast on Wolverine Sports Radio, a member of the V Sporto Network, and in partnership with SB Nation's Maize and Brew, for Wolverine fans from coast to coast. Go Blue, and welcome to this week's Michigan Game Day edition of the show. I'm your host, Mike Fitzpatrick. We usually have our Visitors Edition on Tuesday, but nothing is normal this week. Everyone's schedule is stressed with the quick turnaround for the Big Ten Championship game. If all goes well, later this week we'll have a chat with Purdue radio play-by-play voice Tim Newton. Today, we'll be joined by Michigan beat writer Aaron McMann from MLive with his thoughts on Saturday's huge win and what to expect against Purdue in the Big Ten Championship game this Saturday. First, a few of my thoughts and some cuts from Jim Harbaugh's Monday presser. I don't know if I've fully processed what Saturday's win in Columbus means to me, to fans, or the program. After punishing Ohio State last year in Ann Arbor, I expected they would turn the tables on us this year down in that snake pit. Man, am I glad I was wrong. What we witnessed on Saturday was a game plan and an effort for the ages in this rivalry. The coaching staff laid out the plan, and the players executed it to perfection. Sure, the first half was unnerving, but as we have done all year, we put together a stellar second half. It was a thing of beauty and a performance that ranks as one of the finest by Michigan in this great rivalry. At his Monday presser, Jim was asked how he feels to be back in the Big Ten Championship game for a second year in a row.
Yeah, right where we want to be, playing for the championship, to be champions of the West. That's huge. That's big. And it's sunk in. I'm coming back from the game. It's been just a great thrill of winning, great feeling of victory.
He talked about how impressed he was with the game plan his coaches put together against Ohio State.
It was incredible. The coordinators, Jesse Minter and Steve Klingscale on defense, offensively, Sharon Moore, Matt Weiss, Jay Harbaugh on special teams. The level of preparation and the level of detail, it was Super Bowl-like, and we understand this is like having a Super Bowl every year.
Jim said what stood out to him on Saturday is what stood out all year, the character of his team.
I mean, Donovan Edwards, he could have taken a knee in this game. Instead he wore a cast. Now he's a legend. J.J. McCarthy could have been a guy like, I'm J.J. McCarthy. I'm a 5-star quarterback. I'm not here to hand the ball off, and never. I mean, he'll do anything for the team. He'll block, he'll run down the field and block for a running back, 50 yards down the field, do anything for the team. Put his shoulder down and score a touchdown at the goal line. Now he's a legend. So many guys. Cornelius Johnson could have been somebody that complained about how many targets he's getting, or the passing game, should be front and center, etc., but doesn't, and continues to block and make the tough catch across the middle, diving catches. In this past game, he makes. He really got us started in that game Saturday against Ohio State, and he kept us going. So many guys. Mozzie Smith, another would come to my mind. I mean, has asthma, completely changed his body in the aforementioned weight room to become the football freak number one. I mean, there was a time where it was hard for Mozzie to play 3 plays in a row, and he played 61 plays in this last game. He played his best game that he's ever played. Had 4 tackles, gave the most pass rush in the game, and captain. Can't say enough about him. Taylor Upshaw could have been bitter about not getting as much play time as some of the other guys at the position. Didn't. Now he's a legend. A lot of examples. But I think that's who the team is. That's what Michigan has always been about and is, and also what their parents poured into them, from a very young age. So I would call it all those things.
As much as we want to savor this win, and we will for a long time, there is work to be done. This Saturday, we meet a tough Purdue team in Indianapolis. My guest today says, as good as this season has been, it's not over yet. With us next is beat writer Aaron McMann from MLive. So stay with us. Here with us on the game day edition of our show this week as we look back at that glorious win on Saturday in Columbus and ahead to the Big Ten championship game in Indianapolis this Saturday is beat writer Aaron McMann from MLive. Great to have you back again, Aaron.
Mike, it's good to be back, and we've got more games to talk about.
Absolutely. The season continues, which is exactly what we were hoping for when this started on September 3rd. And we'll get to that Big Ten championship game in just a minute. As I said, we are all basking in the glow of a great win in Columbus on Saturday. So let's start with that. For those of us who grew up in the 60s and the 70s, we've seen big Michigan wins, Big Ten championships, well before the playoffs, of course. But there's a generation of Michigan fans out there until last year who had seen those wins on the Jumbotron, had read about them, never experienced it. The last 2 years, man, has it turned around, and not only is it huge for the rivalry, but the fan base too, Aaron.
Yeah, I mean, 100%. As you said, 2 years in a row, good thing for the fans. I mean, I remember growing up in the late 90s, and I'm sure many of your listeners remember fondly. They were winning, it seemed like every year. They're in the national title hunt, it seemed like every year. The program had gotten off track a little bit, the last couple of decades, but Jim's credit. I mean, he's done a fantastic turnaround in the last 2 years. He kind of looked inward, changed the coaching staff and kind of the culture in the program. I know it's a cliche thing to say, but it's something that the players keep bringing up. It seems like interview after interview. Things are different at Schembechler Hall and Ann Arbor these days, and we're seeing it kind of carry out in the field.
Yes, we are seeing it carry out in the field. And let's talk about J.J. McCarthy for a minute. When he was named starter in September, a large portion of the fan base thought, here we go, aerial assault, and it wasn't that way. Even though the passing stats on Saturday were not impressive for him, to me, that was a coming out party in a way for JJ, wasn't it?
Yeah, I mean, this was essentially a super slow build to kind of what we saw on Saturday. It seemed like week after week we've been asking the coaching staff, where the passing game was where it was. We'd seen them try and try some of those deep shots down the field to varying success. It was almost a carbon copy of kind of what they did last year with just different quarterback and a different face at running back. Saturday was kind of a game that I think many fans wanted to see. JJ, we all knew coming into the year his arm strength and his talent and his 5-star status and everything else. But you really saw that kind of come to roost on there. Not only with his arm, but his legs too. I mean, we'd seen that before. That was one of the reasons why I think he won the starting job over Kane Maximum at the beginning of the year. He just kind of added that different dimension, that ability to just kind of tuck the ball and run with it. and pick up first downs and extra yards as needed. And that certainly helped his game on Saturday. He was a game changer, a playmaker, that kind of, program quarterback that you want that can kind of take you to the next level. I think they believe they found it.
I think so. And, we saw the stats. He was 12 for 24. We saw what he did with his legs. But what he cemented, I think, for a lot of the fan base is that he has it, and he was a leader. He was not fazed by the moment at all, was he?
No, and it's something Jim's been talking about for weeks now, him having that it factor, that type of moxie, that kind of game, that game-changing moment, the vibe to him. I mean, he's the guy that doesn't seem to get fazed under pressure. He seems to have the same demeanor every time he talks to the kid, this kind of happy-go-lucky, nothing's wrong in the world feeling, which is, I mean, in a way, it's probably what you want. I mean, this kid just doesn't seem to, as I said, get fazed by anything. He might get sacked, or he might turn the ball over, yet he turns around and makes a play on the very next drive. So, yeah, I mean, they've certainly found their guy. I think for a long time now, the fans and maybe Jim himself have been, they've been wanting that quarterback that can kind of take Michigan to the next level. Credit to Cade McNamara. He did that last year. He kind of ran the offense and managed it well, and obviously changed the way that they played. But I think JJ, you're seeing that added dimension, that difference between the two, and it's certainly played out here in the last few weeks down the stretch here.
Well, also a great performance from Cornelius Johnson. I felt he always had these kind of games in him. We just did not ask him to be this kind of receiver most of the year. That makes Saturday all the more special. That was a great performance from him, wasn't it, Aaron?
Yeah, and I think his performance in ways being a little overshadowed. I mean, we like to talk about Kate. We like to talk about JJ and those long runs from Donovan, but I think in a way that first half, those deep balls that Cornelius caught, the first one where he kind of cut the corner and ran down the sideline, he kept Michigan in it. I mean, kudos to him. He's had his moments all season long where he's flashed that ability to be that big time guy. He's also had some mistakes, whether it was a costly penalty or a drop ball. He came to play on Saturday. Michigan needed a couple of those on offense if they're going to keep up with Ohio State, and he kind of answered the bell. Credit to him. Career game, very good day. I can remember talking to some of my colleagues in the press box afterwards, and maybe during the game, but they're almost equating his performance to Ty Street. So it was a good game for him coming out. You wonder what that's going to do for his confidence moving forward, not only for himself but Michigan's offense and their willingness to get him the ball more. But he was not only that big time guy, but that playmaker, that guy that can create something out of nothing. And like I said, it's exactly what the Wolverines needed against the high-octane offense, or high-octane Ohio State.
And speaking of great performances, I was watching Donovan Edwards early in the game and thought, man, he looks like he has an oven mitt on. Best case scenario, I thought, hey, we're going to use him as a decoy, but man, was I wrong. That performance from him on Saturday in the fourth quarter in particular will be legendary, won't it, Aaron?
Yeah, in a way, I almost felt like they did use him as a decoy in the first half. They're giving him the ball, and he obviously wasn't getting much out of it, but I think they felt like they needed to try and sustain something on the ground to keep Ohio State honest. But as the game wore on, it almost seemed like he was getting more and more comfortable, stronger as the carries kind of began to tick up. And as you saw, I mean, as the game got on, his rushes were getting longer and longer. And then that fourth quarter hit, and he finally broke those two big plays that kind of put the game out of reach. But yeah, credit to him. I mean, Donovan's another guy who's had big games in the past. He showed up big time in the Penn State win this year. He's had, key moments and key plays. But they had to lean on him in a way in the second half, against Ohio State to kind of kill clock and put that game away. And he did. Again, Jim Harbaugh mentioned it this week. Donovan had the option of not playing. Maybe he wouldn't if it was a lesser opponent early in the year. But it was Ohio State. It was the Super Bowl. It was a game that they felt like they needed to win, and they certainly had to win for playoff, a playoff spot and getting the Big Ten championship. But yeah, Donovan was kind of in a way kind of an MVP. I mean, he stuck it out, answered the bell. Everything they asked of him, he did, and by the end of it, he ended up being, as Jim Harbaugh put, a legend.
Well, another kid that I think needs some love is Colston Loveland, 18 years old. When you see a picture of him, he looks like he's a freshman in high school, not college. And a lot was asked of him. I mean, Eric All's been gone most of the season. Schoonmaker injured the last few weeks, so more was asked of him. And Schoonmaker really, I thought, was clearly less than 100% on Saturday. But Colston, both blocking and getting out there on routes, that kid is a talent that's going to be fun to watch in the coming years, isn't he?
Yeah, he might be the biggest, when you step back and look at it, he might be the biggest surprise on the offensive side of the ball this year. I mean, they've gotten production from a lot of guys. You mentioned Eric Hall being out for a while. Schoonmaker, remains one of Michigan's, top pass catchers. Yet Colson Loveland has kind of quietly come on week after week this year, showed up in big moments, hasn't made too many mistakes. And that's rare for a true freshman. I mean, as you mentioned, this is a kid who's just straight out of high school from Idaho. This is kind of unfamiliar territory for him. He's playing in a big-time program and a big-time stage, and the kid's coming through. He's another guy that doesn't seem to waver under pressure. And if you're Jim Harbaugh on the coaching staff, you got to be patting yourselves on the back because you got a kid that came in right away. It's rare. I mean, it's one thing to develop a kid into a elite tight end, but he's almost already there. So I think they got to be liking what they're seeing, and he's going to be a superstar, I think, in another year or two.
We wondered about the two-headed monster calling plays all year. There was a lot of discussion about how it was getting done. I don't think we still know exactly how that is working, but I thought even with the struggles in the first half, that game plan and the play calling was at a very high level, wasn't it, Aaron?
Yeah, you got to give a credit to. I mean, we talk about all the plays made and everything else, but I think more than anything, the coaching staff deserves credit here for the game plan and the scheme they kind of cooked up. Because behind the scenes, they obviously knew that Blake Corum was going to be at less than 100% and that he was going to be unavailable. They knew the situation Donovan Edwards was in. So they had to throw the ball more. I mean, they had to scheme up and get these receivers open. So kudos to Sherrone Moore and Matt Weiss. I mean, they recognized how Ohio State was playing defensively. It almost seemed like they were stacking the box and trying to hone in on the rush because, quite frankly, that's really all you've seen all year on tape for Michigan's offense. Yes, as I said, they tried the passing game, but it wasn't really successful. So I think in a way Ohio State was betting on if shutting down Michigan's run game that they wouldn't be able to move the football or do much. Well, I mean, that opened things up for the passing game, and that's one of the reasons why you saw so many of the receivers get so wide open. I mean, from Ronnie Bell to Cornelius Johnson, you mentioned Colson Loveland, even that trick play with Khalil Mullings, the kind of the jump throw to Schoonmaker. It was there for the taking. And I think Weiss and Sherrone Moore deserve a lot of credit. Jim Harbaugh praised both of them this week for the game plan they put together. It was really something that I don't want to say none of us saw coming just because we've heard so much that, the passing offense was on its way. But the fact they hadn't shown much of it on tape, I think part of that was by design. Obviously, Michigan didn't want to show too much and tip Ohio State off and what they could do, but they pulled it out at the right time, and it was a big reason why Michigan came out victorious on Saturday.
Well, another big reason was that defense, and maybe we should have started by talking about the D, but let's spend some time on these guys. I mean, Michigan's down 10-3, and that offense was struggling. But the defense, even though they gave up some yards between the 20s, played big time in the first half and really kept Michigan in the game until the second half when they got the offense going, didn't they?
Yeah, that was my biggest takeaway, especially from that first half. I mean, Michigan was only trailing by 3 at half. There was a huge discrepancy on the stat sheet between total yards allowed, first downs, everything else. Yet Michigan was still in the game. Obviously, that was a big reason for that, were the big plays on the offensive side of the ball. But the defense, after that first quarter, really kind of slowed Ohio State down. They're giving up yards, but they got a key turnover on downs. They forced Ohio State to a punt on a couple straight drives. They really were frustrating them. You could see kind of C.J. Stroud. He was getting his throws off, but some were high because he was rushed, or some were dropped because the receivers were tightly covered. So it was really, as we talked about all season long, an all 11 kind of performance. No one really had a breakout, or stood above anyone else. It was one person made a play, then another person made a play. And it's really been kind of the storyline of the defense all season long. They've got production from all 3 levels. Key guys have stepped up at different points. And it's a kudos to Jesse Minter and the coaching staff. We talked about the coordinators on the offensive side of the ball. Give Minter and Steve Klinkscale and the guys there credit. I mean, they did a good job. They came with a game plan of allowing Ohio State to, move the ball, but keeping the ball in front of them and creating turnovers and forcing mistakes and just really frustrating them. And you saw it, bear out in the second half. Michigan, it was a totally different game. Michigan was playing the type of ball they wanted to. They were able to move the ball on the ground. They were able to keep control of the clock and flip the time of possession. And then, before you knew it, Michigan was up, Ohio State was down, and they were pressing. And it kind of opened up some opportunities for Michigan's defense. The back-to-back interceptions. The key plays from Mike Sainristil, the PBUs in the end zone. This unit has been, I think, perhaps the biggest surprise in the team all year long. I mean, we talked about in the preseason the question marks they had, the players they had to try to replace. I would say they've done that and more, and without the superstars that we talked about last year.
Absolutely. I mean, that was 11 guys playing as one lung really on defense all season. But it's hard to single out players on that defense. But one of the guys Saturday that I thought, man, jumped out at me was Mike Sainristil. I've enjoyed watching him all year. Jim talked about it at his presser on Monday, saying, hey, you ask a guy to switch positions, and he did it eagerly. And it usually takes some time to make that adjustment. But those pass breakups from him on Saturday, especially the last one in the end zone, were so big, weren't they?
Yeah, it's another example of kind of the culture shift that Jim and his staff have kind of orchestrated. You've got guys who are willingly, ready to move positions. Maybe it's a playing time thing, but Mike, realized that, he felt like that. He realized that was the best move for the team. They needed help on the defensive side of the ball at that nickel spot. Jackson Hill departed. They were unknown. They didn't know who they were going to go with there. As we've seen the defense, they like to play with 5 defensive backs most of the year. Sometimes they go 6. And he's been a huge part of that. I mean, he's made plays. It almost seems like he's gotten better as the season's gone on, which is to be expected. We haven't played defensive back in several years, but this is a move I think the coaching staff genuinely felt could work. I mean, Mike was a defensive back in high school. He knew the position. We had heard from players all season long that, there were situations in the past, whether it was last year or even in the off season, where, he was playing both ways, or he was, when he was a receiver, he would kind of put over the defensive side of the ball to kind of just get involved. So they felt confident in him. I don't know if they expected this type of year from him, but he's been a shining star, probably another surprise on the defensive side of the ball. Just to get the production they've got out of him, the playmaking. And, again, Jim was asked about the recruiting on Monday, just the discrepancy and how they've kind of made mold of some of these 3- and 4-star kids they got out of high school. Mike was a big reason that he's a 3-star kid. They developed into a good Big Ten player. And you saw it borne out Saturday. Michigan had good Big Ten players, and you can make the case Ohio State had a bunch of elite guys. But when you play together as a team and you're schemed up well and you're coached well, you can still win the big game. And with Mike, that's exactly what happened.
Well, another 3-star that Jim pointed out at his presser on Monday was Rod Moore. And, coming into the season, he's one of those kids, he's on the roster, but what are you going to get from him? He's young. He's from Ohio. But, yeah, 3-star. But, man, when you watch him on Saturday, when I watched the game again on Sunday, he is where he is supposed to be all the time. Big time effort on Saturday.
Man, he's so darn smart. I can remember Jim Harbaugh talking about him last year, how he came in as a true freshman and was studying so much film. I think he made the reference that Jim was able to watch all the players' activity on their iPads and film watching, and he knows Rod had been watching more film than any other freshman on the team. So he's certainly a film junkie. The kid's very smart. He knows football very well, and I think that's one of the reasons why he got on the field so quickly last year. And then his talent took off. I mean, by the end of the season, he was a full-time starter. He came into the spring, he had to re-earn his job after an injury. He did just that, and they have no qualms of playing him back there. He's another guy who isn't afraid of the moment, comes up big in big moments, and I think he'll get a shot. He still has another year of eligibility left, obviously, before he can go to the NFL. But I got to think an NFL team's going to want him. He seems like another team guy, another guy kind of goes about his business and doesn't complain. He's doesn't have the big attitude. And again, it's just another example of the culture shift at Michigan, the winning formula, winning model that they've developed there at Jim Beckler.
Well, another guy who just doesn't get mentioned enough is Mozzie Smith. I mean, he drew double teams, sometimes triple teams again on Saturday, and still clogged up the middle. So he's getting lost in the wash there. But it's never pretty when you're in the middle. But, man, he gave Ohio State fits on Saturday, didn't he?
Yeah, it's weird because, when you're a defensive tackle, you're kind of an afterthought. You're just expected to be there and move blocks and make sure that the run game doesn't get through for big games. And, if you go back and look at the stats and everything else, I mean, Michigan's done a very good job as a rush defense. Big reason because of that is Mozzie Smith. As you mentioned, he tends to command double teams. And while that doesn't necessarily show up in the stat sheet, the scouts are looking at that. The coaches recognize that, and it helps free up things, on the outside and with other guys. So it's a really unheralded role, as you mentioned, something there you don't really pay attention to unless you're watching film. But the coaching staff appreciates the job Mozzie has done. They've liked what he's been able to accomplish. And Jim, raved about his versatility and just his ability to play so much. I mean, I think he was in 60 plus snaps this week. I think it was the most he'd played in a game yet at Michigan. They feel like he's getting stronger as he's gone along. And he's another smart guy. I mean, Michigan's been able to recruit some very high IQ football players. He's another one of them. He's turned into a quiet team leader. A lot of his teammates kind of really respect him and listen to him. And I can remember in the off season in the summer going to Big Ten Media Days talking to him in Indianapolis, and he's got this quiet, calm, confident sense and demeanor to him that nothing can faze him, nothing will move him. He feels like they can beat anybody on any given week, and he's been another shining star, shining example of this Michigan championship team.
Well, overall, Coach Minter and his staff deserve big time props. Of course, Coach Minter is up for the Broyles Award now, and despite giving up almost 500 yards of defense, that was a great game plan. And what else can you say about the defense? They were spectacular.
Yeah, 500 yards, but I think 180 of them in the second half when the game kind of push came to shove. And I think that's been a calling card of this Jesse Minter defense all season long. They may start slow. They may give up some points and some yards in the second half, but man, they adjust really well. Whatever they do in the locker room with the coaching staff and the players always seems to work. And I think that goes to show his experience and his IQ as a caller, as a defensive coordinator, or someone who's kind of watching games go on. And that's nothing new to Michigan's coordinators. Don Brown did a very good job at adjusting, and Mike McDonald did as well. But you got to remember, keep in mind from a talent perspective, we've talked about this. Jesse Minter's essentially working maybe with maybe a little bit less talent than Mike had last year. Yet he seems like he's getting more out of them, which is a testament to the job he's done and the coordinator that he is. I suspect he's going to be getting some looks for maybe some head coaching jobs here in the near future. His name is up for the Cincinnati head coaching job, given his ties there and his father's time there. Again, another smart guy, another football guy, another guy who isn't afraid to come in and perform at the big level. And again, Jim didn't hire Jesse to begin last year. He went with Mike McDonald instead. But man, I mean, Jesse's turned into quite the acquisition this offseason.
Well, last thoughts on the game, Aaron. What does it say about the state of Michigan football that you pound Ohio State at home last year and then duplicate that feat in Columbus this year?
It's back. I mean, there's no qualms about it. If you wanted it last year, you could have maybe used it was an anomaly. Maybe Michigan had found the right recipe for one season. They had the right playmakers, but Jim Harbaugh has duplicated that with less talent, with new coordinators, with new guys stepping up. And I think momentum has shifted here. I wrote about it early in the week at MLive, but the rivalry with Ohio State has shifted. Michigan now has control. They're playing better football. They seem to have their program seems to be in better shape. And you got to give Jim Harbaugh his due. I mean, there were a lot of doubters a couple of years ago. Some folks wondering if he was still going to be around, if he had the moxie and the ability to fully complete this turnaround at Michigan. Yes, he had some good years, maybe great years, but he couldn't get Michigan over the top. Well, he has now. He's done it 2 years in a row. I expect them to go in Saturday and win a second straight Big Ten championship. But nonetheless, I mean, they're going to get their playoff now for 2 years in a row. I think they're maybe a little bit better equipped to win a game and perhaps play for a national championship. And life is good. Jim was asked on Monday about the win over Ohio State. He called it. He humbly said he thought it was maybe one of Michigan's best wins in program history, and I have to agree. Things are going well. Things are heading the right direction, and I don't know where this stops. We talked about all the talent. The big playmakers on Saturday against Ohio State. Well, many of those guys will come back next year, so Michigan should be just as loaded, perhaps maybe better next year. And I got to think they're probably going to be favorites to three-peat.
Well, let's not forget, the season is not over, and as happy as we are, it's on to Indy and the Purdue Boilermakers. Your thoughts on that matchup Saturday?
Yeah, it's a very similar situation, I think, to the Iowa game last year. The Purdue's coming out of a a really down West division, a division that maybe we could have seen any group of 3 or 4 teams that could have played. It could have been Illinois again. It could have been Iowa. Purdue ended up coming out of it. Look, they're going to be no slouch. They're not going to roll over. They're certainly going to be more well equipped offensively to move the ball than Iowa was last year in the Big Ten championship game. So I think they're going to put up a fight. I have to think that it is in Purdue's backyard, so their fans will probably be there. But I just think Michigan's the more talented team, and they got a ton of momentum. I know they won another Big Ten championship. They've been through this before. I mean, they went through the high of beating Ohio State last year and having the quick turnaround to Indy in the Big Ten title game, and they performed just fine. Michigan's guys probably will be banged up again. I would not be surprised if Blake Corum is limited or doesn't play. But nonetheless, I mean, you saw what they did against Ohio State on the road. I see no reason why they can't duplicate that Saturday in Indianapolis.
My worries are those injuries, but we have more than overcame those on Saturday against Ohio State. I mean, you're coming off such a high when you beat Ohio State down there, and you have to quickly turn around, start game planning for a team like Purdue, who has nothing to lose. But the thing to me is, okay, we're injured. Yeah, we just came off one of the biggest wins in program history. But the mental makeup of this team seems to be so strong, Aaron, that you just sort of know they aren't overlooking Purdue.
No, you nailed it. I think that comes from the top. I mean, Jim Harbaugh is dead set on winning every game that they play. I mean, obviously they want to win a Big Ten championship. They don't want to, in a way, kind of backdoor themselves in the playoffs after losing a conference championship a game. They're probably going to be favored by, 3 possessions. So I have to think they're going to be ready. Injuries will be a question mark. You wonder what the status of even Donovan Edwards is going to be having played through that hand injury. Nonetheless, I expect them to try and give it a go. Michigan's going to try and probably play a full unit. They do have more of their passing game on film. I think they're going to maybe have to be a little bit more creative with the passing game if the running game doesn't get going. Nonetheless, I just think Michigan's going to be too much for Purdue. I think they're just a better team, and I don't think they're the team that is going to slip up in a situation like this. There's been no indication that they are that team. They've had opportunities here this year. They've kind of met every punch that's been thrown at them, and then some. So 13-0 seems like to me it seems like a very real possibility here. And then just a matter of who they're playing in the playoff and where.
Well, final question before we let you get away, Aaron. So let's say we get by Purdue and secure that playoff berth. Last year, I think we saw we were overmatched against Georgia, but that was a defense for the ages that they put on the field. Do you think we're still overmatched against some of these top 4 teams, or is this a different Michigan team now?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think it was a good question going into the Georgia game last year. I think the assumption was that Michigan was going to be overmatched, but how much? You kind of saw that play out in the game. I think maybe Michigan's learned a little bit from that game, but I think for them to be successful in going up against a potential Georgia, whether it's a national championship or the semifinal, I mean, I think they got to be fully healthy, and I think Blake Corum would have to get his knee right. I think Donovan Edwards have to get his hand right. Everything you would have to have almost a duplicate scenario at Ohio State on Saturday, where the offense is clicking and the defense does just enough to get by. So I don't know. I think at this point I would presume Michigan would still be the underdog, considered the underdog going to that game. Now, has Michigan learned from that situation? Probably. I can't get over the post game of the Orange Bowl last year and watching J.J. McCarthy and Donovan Edwards and Angelo Anthony on the field, just kind of watching the post game celebration, soaking it in, and kind of realizing that maybe the moment was maybe a little too big for Michigan at that point. But now having been there and gone through the process, I have to think maybe they'll be a little bit more better equipped to kind of understand the magnitude of the situation. But we'll see. I mean, there's still a lot of football to play. Maybe Georgia gets upset in the semifinal and Michigan, goes up against, someone else. But we'll see. I do have to think if they are paired up with perhaps like TCU in the semifinal, I think that's a very good matchup for them. But we'll see what the number 4 team is. USC is very talented, another explosive offense. But I got to think Michigan's going to be feeling good about themselves going to the playoff. If they're not, the number 1 seed, they probably certainly will be number 2. And we'll have a very good chance to get to play for a national championship.
A lot to look forward to. It's almost December, and we're still playing football, so let's enjoy the ride, because we all know, as Michigan fans, it's been a long time, so get on the bus and enjoy the trip. Here with us today has been beat writer Aaron McMann from MLive. Always a pleasure having you on the show with us, Aaron. We've enjoyed it all year, and we look forward to that next visit.
Thanks for having me, Mike.
On Quick Hits today, no injury updates. I think it's safe to assume Blake is out for this week, and we have no word on any other injuries. I think it's also safe to say the Ohio State game taught us this. We have injuries, but we have plenty of depth that can step up and fill those voids, as we saw on Saturday. As I said at the top of the show, I flipped the script a bit this week because of everyone's crazy schedules. On Thursday, we'll bring you our Visitors Edition with Purdue radio play-by-play voice Tim Newton, so I hope you'll come back for that. I'm trying to get everything up early this week because, like many of you, I am headed to Indy for Saturday's game, and I cannot wait. As enjoyable as Saturday's beatdown of Ohio State was, I want more. A Big Ten championship and another crack at the playoffs, so it is gonna be fun. That does it for now, though. Have a great Wolverine week, everyone. I'm your host, Mike Fitzpatrick. Until we meet again, take care, and as always, go blue. Thanks for joining us today on The Michigan Man, here on Wolverine Sports Radio, a member of the V-Sporto Network, and in partnership with SB Nation's Maize and Brew. Our listener lines are open 24/7 for your calls at 313-263-4842. That's 313-263-4842. Or email us at themichiganmanpodcast@yahoo.com. That's themichiganmanpodcast@yahoo.com. The Michigan Man Podcast is produced at the studios of Robin Lynn Productions, Allen Park, Michigan, and is not affiliated with the University of Michigan. Go Blue!